A struggling waitress gave her last $20 to a crying customer who couldn't pay his bill. She had no idea how she'd eat for the next 3 days, but his tears broke her heart. 24 hours later, someone knocked on her door with news that would change her life forever. The evening shift at Ruby's Diner crawled toward closing time as Jessica Martinez wiped down tables that had been wiped 100 times before. Her feet aching from 8 hours on worn-out shoes she couldn't afford to replace. At 24, she worked 2 jobs to pay for community college classes and support her grandmother whose Social Security barely covered medications, let alone rent. Her bank account held exactly $43 until Friday's paycheck, 20 of which sat folded in her apron pocket as emergency money she'd promised herself not to touch unless absolutely necessary. She had 3 days to make the remaining $23 stretch to cover gas and food, a calculation she'd gotten depressingly good at making, but tonight would test whether her calculations mattered against the unexpected pull of compassion. The last customer sat alone in the corner booth, an older black man probably in his 70s, his weathered hands trembling as he stared at the check the previous waitress had left. Jessica approached with her professional smile, ready to clear his plate and close out for the night. "Sir, is everything okay with your bill? Can I get you anything else?" The man looked up, and Jessica saw tears streaming down his face, embarrassment and desperation mixing into an expression that made her heart clench. "Miss, I'm so sorry. I thought I had my wallet. I must have left it at home. I haven't eaten all day and I was so hungry I didn't think. I can come back tomorrow to pay. I promise I'm good for it. I just don't know what to do right now." Jessica's manager appeared from the kitchen, having overheard the situation, his expression hardening in the way it did when he suspected someone was trying to get free food. "Sir, we can't let you leave without paying. I'll need to call the police if you don't have another way to settle this bill." The man's face crumpled further, his whole body seeming to shrink with shame. "Please don't. I'm not trying to cheat anyone. I'm 73 years old. I lost my wife last month and I'm not thinking straight. I just forgot my wallet. I can show you my address, my ID. I'll pay tomorrow, I swear." The manager's face showed no sympathy, one hand already reaching for the phone. Clearly planning to make an example of this situation, Jessica made a decision that her practical mind screamed was stupid, that the voice of survival in her head said she couldn't afford, but that her grandmother's voice, always urging her to be kind even when kindness cost everything, insisted was right. "Wait," she said, pulling the $20 bill from her apron. "I'll cover his bill." The manager looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Jessica, that's your tip money. Don't be ridiculous." But Jessica pressed the 20 into his hand firmly. "It's fine. His bill is $18. Keep the change for yourself." The manager shrugged, taking the money and walking away muttering about bleeding hearts and stupid choices, leaving Jessica with the elderly man who now looked at her with such overwhelming gratitude that fresh tears spilled down his weathered cheeks. "You didn't have to do that," the man said, his voice breaking. "I could see in your eyes that you need that money yourself. Why would you help a stranger?" Jessica sat down across from him, suddenly too tired to stand. "Because my grandmother would have done the same thing. Because you look like my grandfather did before he passed. Because sometimes we have to choose kindness even when we can't afford it. Especially when we can't afford it, because that's when it matters most." The man reached across the table and took her hand. "What's your name, young lady?" "Jessica Martinez," she replied. "And yours?" "Walter Thompson," he said. "Jessica, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that you chose compassion when you had every reason not to. That matters more than you know." Jessica walked Walter to the door, making sure he got safely to his car, and then finished closing the diner. She drove home calculating how to make $23 last 3 days, accepting that she'd probably skip most meals, and hope her grandmother didn't notice she was eating less, to make sure there was enough for both of them. She fell asleep that night, not regretting her choice but wondering why doing the right thing so often had to hurt, why kindness seemed to punish the people who could least afford to be generous, why the universe didn't reward compassion with anything, except the knowledge that you'd been a decent person when it would have been easier not to be. The next morning, Jessica was getting ready for her day shift at her other job when someone knocked on her apartment door. She opened it to find a man in an expensive suit holding a briefcase, looking distinctly out of place in her rundown building. "Ms. Martinez. I'm David Chen, attorney for Walter Thompson. May I come in?" Jessica's heart sank, immediately assuming this was somehow bad news, that her kindness had backfired in some way she hadn't anticipated. She let him in, and David sat at her small kitchen table. Opening his briefcase with careful precision, "Mr. Thompson asked me to come here today because he wanted you to know something about the man you helped last night. Walter Thompson is the retired founder of Thompson Industries. He's worth approximately $400 million. Jessica's brain couldn't process what she was hearing, certain she'd misunderstood. Last night, Walter was having one of his bad days. He has early-stage Alzheimer's, and sometimes he gets confused and forgets things like bringing his wallet. His family has been trying to convince him to stop driving, but he's stubborn about maintaining his independence. When he came home last night and told his daughter about what happened, about the young waitress who'd given her last $20 to help a stranger she thought was poor, she called me immediately." David pulled documents from his briefcase. "Mr. Thompson wants to do something for you, Jessica. He's establishing a trust fund in your name worth $1 million, accessible immediately for education, housing, medical care for your grandmother, and living expenses. Additionally, he's creating a scholarship program called the Jessica Martinez Compassion Fund, which will provide assistance to students like yourself who work multiple jobs while pursuing education. It will be funded with another $5 million and administered by a foundation that wants you to be on the board of directors, with a salary of $75,000 per year." Jessica sat frozen, unable to process words that seemed like they must be a dream or a cruel joke. David continued gently. "Mr. Thompson told me that in his 73 years, during which he went from poverty to wealth, he's never encountered someone who so clearly embodied the values he's tried to live by. He said watching you give your last $20 to help him, knowing you needed it yourself, reminded him of why he built his fortune in the first place, to eventually use it to reward people like you, people who choose kindness regardless of cost. This isn't charity, Jessica. This is recognition of character that's rarer and more valuable than any amount of money." Jessica started crying, overwhelmed by the impossibility of her circumstances changing so dramatically because of one $20 decision. But David wasn't finished. "There's one more thing. Mr. Thompson would like you to visit him, not as an obligation, but because he enjoyed your company last night, the genuine conversation you had. He struggles with his Alzheimer's diagnosis and doesn't trust many people. His daughter thinks having someone like you to visit occasionally might help him, if you're willing." "Of course," Jessica managed through her tears. "I'd love to visit him. He reminds me of my grandfather. I'd visit him even without all of this, but I can't believe this is real. How does giving away $20 turn into $1 million trust fund?" David smiled. "It doesn't, usually. But Walter Thompson has spent his retirement doing something unusual. He deliberately puts himself in situations where he appears to need help, then rewards people who help him without knowing who he is or expecting anything in return. He's testing human nature, looking for genuine compassion. He's done this hundreds of times over the past 5 years. You're the first person who's ever given him money you clearly needed yourself. Most people either ignore him or they help but they can afford it. You helped when you couldn't afford it. That's the difference. That's what he's been searching for." Jessica became a regular visitor to Walter's home, their friendship growing as his Alzheimer's progressed, her presence one of the few constants that seemed to comfort him when confusion took over. She finished her education debt-free, moved her grandmother into a safe apartment with proper medical care, and eventually became executive director of the Compassion Fund that helped hundreds of students avoid the exhausting juggling act she'd lived for years. And every time she reviewed scholarship applications, she remembered the night she'd given her last $20 to a crying stranger. The moment when choosing kindness over survival had somehow resulted in both survival and something far more valuable. Proof that compassion wasn't wasted, that the universe sometimes did reward people who gave when they had nothing left to give, and that one decision to help someone could echo forward into countless other lives through the ripples it created.